Next speaker is Tash Baksh. So Tash is the Quality, Health, and Safety, Environmental, and Operational Excellence Director at Cardno. He's also the American Society of Safety Professionals Energy Corridor Chairperson. Getting flipped over to my mic. So Tash uses his responsible care and operational excellence expertise in solving challenges in the energy, oil, gas, and chemical industries throughout the design, manufacturing, operations, supply chain, and customer service. He's a collaborative, results-based leader with exceptional skills in change alignment, execution, improvement, value engineering, negotiation, auditing, and regulatory compliance. Tash will be speaking with us today about efficient inspection management, and I'd like to welcome Tash to the Houston Regional Conference.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you to Lou, Eduardo, and the entire ASQ Houston leadership team just for the hours they've spent to make this event happen. It's a privilege to be here, and I appreciate everyone's attending. I'm just understanding the buttons here to move it forward, move the slides forward.
So you can use the arrows. There are also some arrows on the screen on the left. There you go.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lou. So I want to tell you a story about vacation. Anybody have any good vacation spots they would like to go to? I mean, probably the timing isn't the best right now, but if you could go to somewhere without the current situation. Go ahead, type it in the chat. Yes, I thought about going to the Serengeti actually, a river spot, Ireland, Germany, Puerto Rico. Oh yeah, definitely some great places. Europe, Paris. So, Mergentheim, Germany. That's interesting. Kentucky. I always wanted to go to Kentucky for the fried chicken, even. So my story here started as I was planning a vacation. So I had in mind to go to DC. See the sights, walk around, look at the monuments. Something happened though. Just as I was getting ready, the owner of this pipeline project contacted me and asked for some help to address some quality concerns. The owners indicated that a regulatory agency needed an independent review to close out some quality concerns. So I thought about this for a second, and I figured, oh, this is probably not going to take a very long time, Okay, I'll do it. So I let them know to start with, what I'll have to do is look at, what happened and conduct a review and assessment. And in doing that, there were several things I learned that I want to share in this presentation. To give some context, I want to tell you a little background about the project. So this project started in Hardisty, Alberta, went across Saskatchewan, through Manitoba, down through North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and took a little turn on Steel City to the Shell Wood River Refinery, and also came down to Cushing, Oklahoma. Perhaps some of you might be familiar with this pipeline. This is the Keystone Pipeline. This is the first one, the original Keystone Pipeline. So what happened is really interesting. So the when I looked at what happened in the details, we did a contract review. We had our project execution plan developed, where we had the contract requirements describing how long it was going to be accomplished. We had engineering verification set up. We had the review and approval of design inputs and outputs. We had validation testing to ensure components were tested to meet design limits. We had procurement quality requirements set up to ensure that these requirements were communicated to the vendors and suppliers, and they know what requirements needed to be in place when this material got to the site. We also addressed construction site receiving that talked about what criteria personnel would use when they got it to verify that this is what we ordered, this is the right material, there were no damages, and if there were damages, how they could rectify it. We also had in place a very good structure around site quality activities, where we hired personnel that were experienced, that were competent. So it was interesting that this come up because seems like everything was in place. So we decided to reach out to our project managers. Of course, as you realize, these are fictitious project managers, but you get the point. So we asked our project managers, what the deal was, what happened. So one person suggested that the personnel had different perspectives on what they would use to complete the inspection documentation. They had said a key point was that, perhaps they weren't asking the right questions when they were doing this. So when we looked at the investigation on what went wrong, we realized that the expectation of what was included in the complete documentation needed to be better defined. So what happened was construction proceeded on signing off on inspections that NCRs were completed. However, they were not signed off as completed, or the correction wasn't completed for the verification and closeout process of the NCR form. So what happened was we didn't know how big the leak was. We were thinking, oh, this is not a big deal. We could probably fix this in a short time. We were actually using the wrong tool to bail the bucket, using the bucket to bail the water out of the ship. And one of the things we needed to do was establish the scope of the problem before trying to solve it. Of course, as other speakers have mentioned before, in performing root cause analysis, it could be very overwhelming. Sometimes you could ask the wrong questions or focus on the wrong mitigation. So what we did is we performed a 100% review on the non-conformance report and looked at each reference drawing and compared the deficiency with what was actually installed. We used key performance indicators to figure out what were the similar type issues and the frequency they occurred at different locations, and when they would typically occur, to derive patterns in the data. So what we thought here was, okay, we got some main issues. We know what these problems are. So the patterns revealed to us that the issues were related to welding deficiencies, shipping and handling damages, coating failures, and this was a pattern across each station, each pump station. So, the first reaction when you come across any problem is a quick fix. This is the typical first response, And one of the things we try to do when we have a quick fix is use the most practical tool available. But, duct tape does not solve all the issues, it could solve quite a bit, but not all the issues. So what we did was come up with an action plan, and we worked the plan. So our plan was pretty comprehensive. What we did is that we contacted our contractors and vendors and had them commit to the action items. We had a daily meeting, 2 p.m. every day. And we established, this meeting with the highest persons in each contractor and vendor organizations to call in. And at that meeting, they would report on the status of where they were with the open task. And they would report, on NCR verification and closeout activities from the previous day. So this went on for some time, 7 months to be exact, until we got to the point where we completed the documentation, we completed the NCRs, we had the mechanical certificates to the customer. 7 months later, 7 days a week. Which was interesting. My vacation break didn't seem like it was going to be that long. So where's the efficiency in this? Well, at that time, the customer was satisfied. The regulator was happy that the issues were addressed and closed out. Of course, they performed their own internal checks. The customer was so impressed with the work performed that a follow-on project was awarded. But here are the lessons that helped us be efficient, or more efficient, I would say, the second time around. Sometimes in finding a solution, you develop greater efficiency. So what we learned was that we recognized when and where deficiencies will occur. We reviewed the data from past projects and hours. We consulted some of the subject matter experts. We reviewed historical data from the regulators that were available. And we put in place monitoring points that we didn't have before on where we would detect deficiencies, specifically like rail cars, handling on ports. We identified who had the authority and responsibility for corrective action, who needed to approve deviations and concessions, and what dispositions the project would agree to ahead of time. We looked at personnel competency in terms of identifying leads in each area to ensure that we had persons that we could trust to ensure that each person's voice at the front lines could be heard and that they would feel supported to make the right call. We looked at the equipment capability from the point of view that will the operator be limited by the gauge complexity that we're using. For example, it's a big difference to use phase array inspection versus RT inspection. And did we have backup equipment? Do we have any constraints there? We looked at the material test reports for material conformance to ensure that chemical analysis were meeting the specified standard requirements. We looked at measurements for the type of tools we needed. For example, we wanted to verify that it was feasible to check more than one characteristics with a single gauge, and there were no restraints when that was faced. So the actions we took included knowing the quality level that we were trying to achieve at each inspection location. As you saw, some locations might have a frigid winter, which makes the requirements very different based on where the location was. We needed to understand the quality level in terms of the criticality of the task, in which we looked at from a risk perspective, in terms of the criticality as a product of the severity of failure and the likelihood that that failure would occur. So we did our risk rating and ranked that. Then based on that, we developed an inspection frequency, which utilized an agreed sampling plan, where there was a logical method established for sampling. We also looked at the restriction and constriction in the supply chain process to verify that in terms of moving pipe via rail cars or via truck, where there were constraints, how far ahead we had to organize these transportations. We also learned in this planning process that when there was weakness that we identified in the SWOT analysis, that we needed to look for the opportunity relative to the weakness or threat that was identified. For example, a weakness in a particular discipline such as electrical and instrumentation inspection was in fact an opportunity to partner with an organization where we could leverage our combined strength. In planning, we looked at what type of tools we needed, and in those tools, did it have the right accuracy for the precision level that we needed to meet the acceptance criteria. For the critical success factors, we looked at what characteristics make our product or service demonstrate quality in the inspection process. And if we communicated that and defined that to the team in terms of what it looks like, in terms of the dimensions, meeting purchase order requirements, but also the attitude that we expected from our personnel, which was really very important. As you know, many of you would know that attitude is one of the most important things in quality. We also learned that we needed to define the components, steps of the tasks that needed to be completed based on the work area. We needed to understand, like I mentioned before, where the key risk areas are. Historically, where there are failures and how often they occur, so we could decide if we're going to tolerate the failure. And of course, assess and develop the risk scenario mitigations. We planned for personnel training, and we found that one of the things that worked best was to weave together a competency process that included personnel that had in-depth first-hand experience with dealing with everyday type inspection type problems, personnel who were able to relate well to their colleagues and supervisors and provide advice on the methods and actions for solutions, as well as personnel that could share their expertise through technical meetings and were able to have specific classes that would help their colleagues get up to speed, like a auditor awareness course or how to get prepared for an audit when we had the regulator coming to a friendly visit. We also looked at how we could establish the information management system to ensure that we had internal and external documents controlled. For example, external project documents were better controlled on the project or job level than at a higher organization documentation system management level, where the job levels were the persons using them on a regular basis and were familiar with what changes were happening relative to what was happening in the field, versus centralized document management system where the changes took a longer time to move through the system. We wanted to verify.
One more minute.
We want to verify at each work location, access, and had updated documentation. So what does efficient inspection look like now? Well, in all of that, we recognize that this paper-based system, we sought a better approach by having an electronic system versus a paper-based system. This electronic system provided real-time feedback to the customer on any open NCR and related document. We had the NCRs tracked in a module where we could know if they were signed off, if they were actually verified. We were able to run key performance data that related to NCR type and failures that could tell the supply and characteristics. Our incident tracking process was automated to also track quality corrective action reports, as well as HSC incident reports, and provide root cause mitigation and tracking and closeout. So how did we reimagine quality on projects and jobs? We looked at the visibility and successes in real-time challenges. We were able to celebrate best practices and communicate them throughout the organization and to the customers. And based on the areas where we had failures, we were able to focus on specifically like the assembly process, where we were historically experiencing failures and developing mitigation plans to address these failures and communicate this to the team. We implemented something that I'd like to call the fresh eyes approach, where we were seeing each inspection as if we were seeing it for the first time. And we would ask the questions and expectations that go along with that, such as assembly drawings or instructions, material test reports, certificates of compliances, the tools and equipment that were needed. And we had each person empowered with the power to stop any activity if there was a quality or HSE concern. And this is what we thought drives our improvement, was that courage to stop and ask a question about the activity. So what's different in this approach? Well, the consistent approach with having our inspection team and a cloud-based system allowed us that uniqueness, where we were able to have multiple projects for a customer, be able to know the status of the inspection activity, help to resolve the non-compliance, and ensure that the documentation was signed off. One of the key unique features of that is that we were able to present to the customer an evaluation that let them know at the end of the job, the inspection activity hours, the number of type of issues found, where it was found, the improvement initiatives we took, and how we added value to their project in contributing to the bottom line and reducing their operational failure, which they were quite happy with. So what's next? Well, for us, we want to get better at it. And we're continuing to pursue excellence. And I have some gifts for everyone. I just want to say thank you for listening to me, and I really appreciate your time here.
Thank you very much, Tash. It was a pleasure having you. A lot of people thanking you in the chat. So we have time for just one question, and then we go to break, and you can continue with the questions if Tash stays here. Well, there are no questions so far. I loved what you said about the attitude, that's so important in quality, and yes, it is. We're going to talk about more the attitude and the culture with the next presenters, but this was truly useful for everyone, saying nice images, and everyone thanking you. Thank you, Tash. So if you stay during the break, you can continue checking the text chat and see if you have more questions and you'd like to answer.
Sure. Someone asked if the response was reactive.
Yeah.
I think initially the response was reactive because there was a problem that came up that wasn't planned for. So what started off as a reactive scenario by forward planning was able to be something that was useful and beneficial to the customer. Because problems come up in life, right? We all have trouble in this world. That's just, you know, the world we live in. And, you know, whether it's at home, at the project, or somewhere else, we have to find a way to deal with it. And I think, you know, sometimes forward planning, when you encounter a problem and the lessons learned is, you know, something that could be really useful in being proactive. And by the way, I ended up taking a vacation the following spring to DC, which was fantastic. I even got to go to the president at that time.